I think the Queen's duty and her service, her tolerance, her commitment to others, I think that's all been incredibly important to me, and it's been a real sort of guiding example.
The doors of Sandringham had barely closed on Christmas when the British monarchy was turned upside down, not by a foreign threat, not by scandal from the press, but from within, by the one man the institution had been quietly underestimating for years. Prince William had made his move, and when he did, nothing in that ancient household would ever be the same again. This is not a story about family drama or palace gossip. This is the story of how a Prince of Wales, not yet a king, reached into the very heart of the British crown and ripped out what was rotting inside it. What he uncovered was so damaging, so deliberate, and so deeply personal that it would bring a dying king to tears and send a queen into exile. But before we get to the shocking conclusion, we need to go back to the beginning, because the move William made at that Christmas lunch didn't happen overnight. It was planned, calculated, and executed with the kind of precision that only comes from months, perhaps years, of watching, waiting, and building a case that could not be denied. So how did it all start? And what exactly did William find that justified such ruthless, decisive action? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the British royal family forever. The Christmas table that changed everything. Christmas lunch at Sandringham is one of the most carefully choreographed events in the royal calendar. Roasted turkey, fine wine, polite conversation across a table, heavy with tradition and expectation. It is a setting designed to project unity, a family at peace with itself and with the nation it represents. But on this particular Christmas, the unity was a fiction, and William knew it. He sat at the head of the table, motionless.
And I felt, you're losing people every single time you have those headlines. We all get that there's a really big urgent message, and I'm not...
His eyes tracking every gesture, every glance, every casual laugh. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, filled the room with the easy confidence of people who believed their access to this world was permanent. They spoke about estate renovations and wine cellars with the casual entitlement of those who had long confused royal proximity for royal right. King Charles looked tired, not just the fatigue of a man fighting illness.
We also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries,
but the deeper exhaustion of someone carrying more than he could name. Camilla's practiced smile flickered, just for a moment, but William caught it. The main course had just been cleared when William set his water glass down on the table. The sound was quiet, a single, deliberate clink. It was barely audible, but everyone at that table felt it. Seconds later, the dining room doors opened. It wasn't the dessert staff. Armed security officers moved into the room with controlled, unhurried precision. Faces unreadable, purpose unmistakable. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A fork paused mid-air. The room held its breath. William rose slowly from his chair and placed a blue folder on the table. The soft thud it made was somehow louder than anything that had been said all afternoon. Inside that folder was the beginning of the end. Forensic audit reports, bank statements, shell company registrations, invoices tracing the movement of millions of pounds, siphoned, rerouted, hidden, from royal accounts that were meant to serve the crown and the country. Tom Parker Bowles's face drained of color. He sputtered, called it an insult, turned to his mother as if she could fix it. Laura Lopes sat perfectly still, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from complete and sudden terror. Camilla gripped her napkin. Her knuckles turned white. She said nothing. King Charles stared down at the pages before him, his expression shifting from confusion.
So you can't be the same as the sovereign if you're the Prince of Wales or the heir.
To something much harder to watch, recognition. The numbers left no room for argument. William's voice, when he spoke, was even, almost quiet, but every word landed like a blow. All contracts between the Crown and the front companies were terminated, effective immediately. State auditors would begin the process of reclaiming misappropriated funds. Access to royal properties and finances was revoked in full. There was no negotiation, no appeals process, no second chance. Security officers stepped forward, guiding Tom and Laura from their seats, out of the dining room, through the estate. They were not permitted to use the main exits, the grand doors designed for kings and dignitaries and heads of state. They were walked through the service corridors and led out through the rear entrance, the door used by delivery drivers and household staff. Their protests echoed in empty corridors. William watched from the window as they were placed in a standard security vehicle and driven away. His expression gave nothing away. He understood how it would look. Ruthless, perhaps even cruel. But he had calculated that too, because the message wasn't just for Tom and Laura. It was for everyone watching from inside the palace walls, every member of staff who had stayed silent, every official who had looked the other way. The era of exploiting royal privilege was finished. The rules had changed, and no one, not even the children of a queen, would be above them. But here is the question that nobody in that room dared ask out loud. How did a Prince of Wales, not yet king, have the legal authority to do any of this? How could he remove the Queen's own children from crown privileges and act against his father's household? The answer lies in what happened 48 hours before that Christmas lunch, and it is far more extraordinary than anything that took place at the dinner table. The midnight transfer of power. 2 days before Christmas, a meeting took place that would never appear in any court circular, any official schedule, or any palace press release. At St. James's Palace, in a secure conference room specifically chosen for its insulation from electronic surveillance, William sat across from the Lord Chief Justice and the Home Secretary. The walls were thick, Tudor-era stone that blocked signals and secrets equally. The atmosphere was less like a royal transition and more like a military tribunal. The official version of events, carefully released to the press afterward, described a voluntary and cooperative transfer. King Charles III,
Bring down inflation to ease the cost of living for families.
Facing ongoing health challenges, had temporarily granted regency powers to William to ensure continuity and stability. The language was measured, reassuring, designed to calm. But the reality behind that transfer was something else entirely. William was not simply stepping in as caretaker. He was taking operational control of the crown specifically to remove what he had concluded was a malignant influence, one that had been allowed to grow unchecked because the man at the center of it was too sick, too trusting, and too in love to see it. At 9:47 p.m., King Charles signed the transfer documents. His signature was shaky but deliberate, the act of a man who understood what he was doing, even if he couldn't yet know the full scope of what his son had uncovered. By 10:15 p.m., William was already acting. His first call was to summon two of the most powerful figures in the palace ecosystem to a midnight meeting at Clarence House, the Director General of MI5 and the Keeper of the Privy Purse, the official responsible for managing the monarch's finances. Their jobs were hanging by a thread, and William made sure they knew it from the moment they arrived. He informed them that their offices had been compromised by influences loyal to the Queen's household. He did not accuse them personally, but their cooperation was not optional. The Keeper of the Privy Purse, a 30-year veteran of royal service, cited protocol, the procedures that had been in place for decades, the rules that governed how things were done. William's reply was short and ice-cold. Those protocols had allowed millions to be stolen. That could no longer be condoned. By 2 in the morning, both positions had new occupants. William had spent months quietly vetting replacements from outside the palace ecosystem entirely. Financial forensics experts, counterintelligence professionals, people whose loyalty was to institutional integrity, not to personalities or power. Then came access to what insiders would later describe as the crown jewel, not a physical object, but a digital one. The black box, a secure archive of decades of financial transactions, security reports, personnel files, and classified correspondence, designed to be accessible only to the monarch and consort, a system whose very exclusivity had created a dangerous blind spot, one that had been exploited with devastating efficiency. At 3:30 in the morning, William ran his first query. All contracts and payments linked to the Parker Bowles family, 5 years of records. What came back confirmed his worst suspicions, and then exceeded them. The financial web. The scheme was not crude. It was not the clumsy opportunism of people simply helping themselves to what was nearby. What William found in that archive was something far more troubling. a sophisticated, long-running financial operation, engineered with the kind of precision that speaks not of desperation, but of intention. Royal funds had been quietly diverted through the most ordinary-looking budget lines: logistics, estate maintenance, diplomatic receptions, charitable events. Each individual entry looked plausible, routine, the kind of expenditure no one would question without reason to look deeper. But the patterns told a different story. Payments had been systematically rerouted, small sums here, larger transfers there, designed to appear legitimate on surface audits while accumulating in accounts that were never meant to be found. At the center of this web, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. They weren't passive beneficiaries. They controlled a network of offshore trusts, registered in the Isle of Man, Jersey, and the British Virgin Islands, each linked to shell companies that held actual palace contracts. Every invoice, every transfer, every signed document. This was not a coincidence. It was architecture. Tom's network controlled the palace's premium food supply, Scottish salmon billed at triple the market rate, wine charged at £2,000 per bottle instead of £500, flowers quadrupled in cost for events that needed no such extravagance. Laura billed tens of thousands of pounds for media advice that amounted to a single email, hundreds of thousands for crisis consultations conducted during periods when no crisis had occurred. And then there was the most damning category of all: special event production and coordination. Cross-referencing invoices with court circulars and photographic records revealed something that stripped away any remaining doubt. Many of the events being billed for had never happened. Others had occurred, but at a fraction of the scale being charged. The total, over 5 years, approximately £45 million, routed through accounts controlled by Camilla's children, every transaction passing through the Queen's office before reaching the keeper of the privy purse. William now had a picture of what had been taken and how it had moved. But the most critical question was still unanswered. Was Camilla negligent, or was she the architect?
Don't want to be scared too much, but it's that sort of frisson, isn't there? Just being a little bit frightened.
The answer was about to emerge, and it would come through a seal, a small, distinctive mark in purple that appeared on document after document at the exact moments when the king was at his most vulnerable. The purple seal. The forensic accountants working in William's secure basement operation at Kensington Palace had been pulled from some of the most demanding financial investigations in British intelligence history. These were not palace bureaucrats. These were people trained to find money that governments and criminal organizations didn't want found. They worked in a windowless room with no internet, no phones, and no contact with the outside world. Their instruction was as simple as it was urgent: find the smoking gun. They found something far worse. A lead analyst who had previously unraveled a £2 billion Russian money laundering network was reviewing the special fund, a reserve pool set aside for royal emergencies, shielded from normal oversight. Royal regulations dating back to the reign of George V required 2 signatures for any withdrawal: the keeper of the privy purse and the monarch himself. The dual approval was a safeguard against exactly the kind of abuse being investigated. Over 5 years, there had been 237 transactions from this fund, the total £87 million. She ran the king's signatures through analysis software, comparing them to verified exemplars from different periods of his reign. A healthy monarch's signature would score between 95% and 98% confidence for consistency, letter formation, and motor control. The results were devastating. On the largest authorizations, amounts ranging from £500,000 to £3 million, the scores fell between 45% and 70%. These were not simply tired signatures. They were produced by someone whose hand trembled, whose motor control was severely compromised, someone signing under heavy medication or extreme fatigue. When these signatures were cross-referenced with King Charles's medical schedule, the picture became a verdict. The largest fraudulent authorizations coincided precisely with chemotherapy treatment dates and post-operative recovery periods, times when anti-nausea drugs and painkillers would dull cognition, slow processing, and reduce the capacity to scrutinize detail. Someone had obtained his medical schedule, and someone had timed the document signings around his most vulnerable moments with clinical precision. But there was more. High-value requests had been buried using what analysts would describe as a sandwiching technique. concealed among stacks of mundane paperwork, ceremonial proclamations, diplomatic letters, military commissions, charitable approvals, piled together so that the dangerous documents were invisible in plain sight. Staff loyal to Camilla's office would apply pressure. Gently, always gently. "We really must get these signed today, sir. Perhaps quickly, so you can rest." And Charles, trusting, fatigued, and surrounded by people he believed were protecting him, would sign rapidly, giving only seconds to each page. Then came the seal. Special fund requests passed through the Queen's office for administrative review before reaching Charles. That process included the application of a small purple insignia, Camilla's personal seal, confirming the document had been reviewed and approved for the King's signature. On every fraudulent authorization, beneath Charles's trembling signature, sat that purple seal, applied 24 to 48 hours in advance, every time. This was not an administrative oversight. Someone had knowingly approved each of these requests, deliberately facilitated the flow of documents to a king who did not have the capacity to understand what he was signing. The implications were no longer about embezzlement. This was elder abuse, systematic, calculated, and inflicted on a man who had devoted his life to the institution being used against him. William needed the originals. Digital evidence was powerful but arguable. Physical documents, bearing Charles's deteriorating signature and Camilla's purple seal, were definitive. And if Camilla realized how close William's investigation was getting, those papers could disappear. A fire in a records room, a plumbing accident, a filing error that conveniently destroyed decades of evidence. William had to move carefully, so he set a trap. The trap and the bodyguard. He identified Margaret Thornton, an administrative assistant in the Privy Purse office, personally recommended by Camilla years earlier and genuinely loyal to her. Margaret wasn't corrupt. She believed sincerely that Camilla was a woman unfairly maligned by history and the press. That loyalty made her entirely predictable. William's investigators arranged for her to overhear a staged conversation between auditors. The money trail had been fully traced. The original signed documents were the final piece. Once retrieved, the case would be airtight. Margaret heard every word. Within 6 hours, Camilla knew. She was taking tea at Clarence's house when the warning reached her through her remaining network. She dismissed her staff and spent the next 2 hours in calculation. The digital evidence William had gathered was substantial, but it was arguable. Physical documents bearing Charles's compromised signature and her purple seal were something else. If those papers survived, everything collapsed. She made her decision. She retrieved a disposable phone kept for exactly this kind of sensitive communication and called Ali Hassan, her chief close protection officer for 15 years. Ali had protected her through the darkest periods of her public life. He had checked cars for explosives, shielded her from paparazzi, carried secrets that no one else could be trusted with. His loyalty had been tested repeatedly and had never wavered, until now. Camilla explained what needed to happen. Safe number 4 in Archive B. The original authorizations. They had to disappear. Ali understood immediately that this was not security work. This was the destruction of evidence, possibly the obstruction of justice. At 1:45 in the morning, he entered Buckingham Palace through a staff entrance, dressed in standard night security clothing. His credentials gave him access to most non-public areas. He carried a flashlight, a laser cutter disguised within it, and an incendiary device for final destruction. He moved through corridors he knew intimately, navigating around patrols and cameras, heading toward the archive room in the palace's oldest, most labyrinthine wing. He arrived at 2:03 a.m. The keypad opened at his clearance level. Inside, the room was dark except for the faint glow of emergency lighting. Rows of reinforced cabinets stretched into the shadows. Safe number 4 stood against the far wall. He activated the laser cutter slowly, quietly melting the internal mechanism. 15 minutes passed before the lock surrendered. The door swung open. Inside, a red portfolio. 40 pages of original special fund authorizations. Charles's signature on every one. Shaking, uncertain, the signature of a man who did not know what he was approving. And beneath each one, the purple seal. Every page documented hundreds of thousands. sometimes millions of pounds fraudulently extracted from the crown. Ali raised the lighter. The room exploded in white light, high-intensity floodlights, multiple sets of footsteps converging from every angle. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice cutting through the sudden brightness with absolute authority. The file stays. Hands on your head. 5 armed Royalty Protection Group officers surrounded him. The tactical team had been waiting. Ali was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. He raised his hands. His weapon was removed. Zip ties. The red portfolio carefully collected and secured. Thompson informed him of the charges: attempted destruction of crown property, unauthorized access, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, and, because he had entered the building armed, potential terrorism-related offenses. Then came the final piece. Thompson told him that the burner phone Camilla had used to issue her instructions had been monitored by GCHQ for the past 3 days. Every word of her order to destroy the documents had been recorded. She had, in her own voice, convicted herself. Ali's testimony and the post-Charles Fund. Ali Hassan sat in a room that officially did not exist, a secure interrogation facility reserved for matters too sensitive for normal legal channels. Metal table, 3 chairs, walls that were certainly soundproof, cameras in every corner. Under emergency provisions of the Official Secrets Act and Royal Security Protocol, there were no lawyers present. Across from him, Prince William and Lord Justice Peyton, the senior legal advisor. William wasn't there simply to build a legal case. He wanted to understand something more fundamental. Why would a decorated protection officer, a man of professional discipline and genuine personal loyalty, cross this line? What had Camilla asked him that was worth the destruction of everything he had built? The interrogation opened with a recording, Camilla's voice, crystal clear, ordering Ali to destroy the documents in Archive B, safe number 4. Ali's face remained still, but William noticed his jaw tighten. His breathing became controlled in the particular way of someone working very hard to display no reaction. Camilla had not asked him to hide the papers or relocate them to somewhere safer. She had demanded they cease to exist. She had expressed no concern for his safety, offered no exit plan. Her only goal was the permanent destruction of the evidence. William laid out the consequences in clinical detail: a minimum of 20 years for trespassing in restricted areas, attempted destruction of national property, endangering a heritage building, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, and possibly terrorism-related charges. His family would lose pensions, housing, and educational support. 30 years of dedicated service would vanish in an instant. Then came the alternative: full cooperation, witness protection-style benefits, sentence reduction, security for his family. In exchange, complete testimony about the conspiracy, the financial architecture, and specifically Camilla's role. Ali sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was with the measured clarity of someone who had already made his decision before he sat down. He said that the loyalty he had believed was noble had become criminal. Camilla had not asked him to protect someone in danger. She had asked him to commit a felony to cover up the systematic theft and exploitation of a dying king. That distinction, he said, changed everything. For 6 hours, Ali's testimony dismantled the last walls of the conspiracy. What he described was not opportunistic theft. It was a strategic financial operation, one with a name. Camilla had called it the Post-Charles Safety Fund. The goal was to secure at least £100 million in independent assets before Charles died, a financial architecture that would insulate her from whatever came after: the transition of power, the possible diminishing of her position, the end of the life she had built. She had used her children as instruments, funneling royal contracts through shell companies to launder money into trusts under their control. She had obtained Charles's medical schedule under the pretense of coordinating her own diary. She had identified the precise windows: post-chemotherapy, post-surgery, heavy medication, when he was most compliant, most trusting, and least able to scrutinize what he was signing. She had dressed fraudulent transfers to her children's companies as charitable donations, conservation initiatives, and cultural investments. Documents that looked, on their surface, like acts of generosity from a king who cared deeply about the world he would leave behind. Ali confirmed that throughout all of this, Camilla never expressed remorse. Her stress was not guilt, it was the fear of being caught. She treated the exploitation of Charles's illness as a business matter. She spoke of the efficiency of the operation, the security of the arrangement. William listened to every word of it and felt something shift inside him that had nothing to do with legal strategy or institutional responsibility. His father, who had loved this woman through decades of public contempt, who had defended her against his own family, who had elevated her to the highest position a woman could hold in the British constitutional system, had been methodically betrayed from the moment his body began to fail him. The evidence was complete. But the most difficult thing William had ever done in his life still lay ahead. Telling the king. The morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of cold that doesn't let up. William drove himself to his father's private residence, ignoring protocol. This couldn't be delegated. This couldn't be delivered through intermediaries or softened by distance. He arrived at 9 in the morning carrying only a leather briefcase. Inside it, the weight of what he had found was incomprehensible given the physical lightness of the papers themselves. Charles was in his private study, surrounded by a lifetime of photographs and mementos, the accumulated evidence of a man who had cared deeply about history, duty, and the world's fragile ecosystems. The cancer had taken a visible toll. His skin carried the fragile translucence of someone whose body was spending its reserves. His frame had thinned. The quiet dignity he still wore seemed for the first time brittle rather than unshakable. Camilla sat nearby with a book in her lap. When she saw William's face, she understood immediately that this was not a conversation she could manage. His expression had closed off entirely. He was no longer a stepson she could redirect. He was the regent. William laid the briefcase on the table and began removing documents in careful sequence. First, the financial audits, charts and graphs tracing the movement of money from royal accounts through shell companies to the Parker Bowles family trusts. Then, the original special fund authorizations, each one bearing Charles's signature and Camilla's purple seal. He explained the scale. Over 5 years, £87 million, ghost invoices, fraudulent contracts, Tom and Laura as ultimate beneficiaries, ownership concealed through layers of corporate structure designed specifically to resist discovery. He handed Charles one document, a £2.88 million emergency conservation payment that had ended up in a Jersey shell company before being laundered into a family trust. Charles's hands trembled as he held it. He struggled to remember signing it. William continued, pairing each authorization with medical records. 43 high-value authorizations. Everyone signed during a period of medical vulnerability. Someone with access to his schedule had exploited those windows with precision. Then William pointed to the seal. He explained what it meant. It wasn't a staff error. It wasn't an administrative oversight. This was active facilitation. Someone had deliberately reviewed and approved these documents before sending them to a king who couldn't properly assess them. Every fraudulent authorization bore her mark. Charles stared at the purple seal. His whole body was shaking now. The woman he had trusted above everyone. The one he had defended when the country despised her. The one he had married knowing it would cost him something. She had looked at the windows his illness created and seen them not as moments requiring extra care, but as opportunities. The last piece of evidence was the recording, Ali Hassan's voice, describing in quiet, precise detail how Camilla had obtained the medical schedule, timed the signings, framed the documents as charitable works, describing the post-Charles Safety Fund, the goal of £100 million, the efficiency with which she had pursued it. After the recording ended, Charles sat in silence for a long moment. Then he asked very quietly, why? He had given her everything, love, protection, status. He had married her knowing the cost, defended her against his own children, made her queen, and she had taken the illness that was slowly ending his life and turned it into a business strategy. The tears that came were not from anger, they were grief, the specific and devastating kind that comes from realizing that the most intimate years of your life were built on something that was never quite real. Camilla tried to speak. Every sentence she started collapsed under the weight of what was documented on the table in front of her. She tried to blame William, claimed that his resentment over his mother's memory had driven her to protect herself. She tried to frame the money as security against uncertainty. William cut through it. Her fear of losing financial security had cost her the only thing that truly mattered. She had had Charles's complete trust, and she had spent it. Charles retreated inward, processing. How many times had she stood beside him with a document, her hand guiding him gently toward the signature line? How many times had he trusted her, believed she was protecting him, and been quietly robbed instead? Every memory of partnership, every private moment of warmth, all of it now had to be re-examined through the lens of what he knew. Eventually, William asked his father directly, did he want him to proceed with justice, or stop to contain the scandal? Charles shook his head. The tears continued, but there was clarity in his eyes now. He had spent his life trying to protect this family's honor. She had destroyed it from the inside while wearing his ring. He nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. It was the saddest thing William had ever witnessed. A father giving his son permission to dismantle the last remnants of a love that had defined his life, for the sake of truth, for the sake of survival. Judgment Day. William stood before Camilla in that same room a short time later, and his voice carried the steady, undecorated weight of finality. She was not being punished as an act of revenge. She was being removed because the monarchy could not survive the spectacle of a criminal trial against a queen consort. He made that clear before he said anything else. He pulled a legal order from his briefcase, sealed by the Prince Regent, countersigned by the Lord Chief Justice. The terms were absolute. She would leave the estate within 15 minutes. She would relocate to a remote property in the Scottish Highlands. Her access to public funds would be limited to a tightly monitored stipend. She would retain the title of Queen Consort in name only, permanently barred from all public appearances, royal events, and ceremonial duties. Most strikingly, she would have no contact with Charles. No visits, no letters, no calls. Any future communication would pass through legal channels alone. Her children's contact with the crown would be limited and supervised, contingent on full cooperation with financial restitution. They had avoided criminal charges only because they had complied. Any attempt to rehabilitate their public image would trigger consequences. Camilla tried to argue, cited her legal rights as queen, invoked decades of service. William did not raise his voice. He simply described the alternative: full criminal prosecution for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, prison, public trials for her children, global scandal. She went silent. Charles offered no intervention. He sat looking toward the window, refusing to acknowledge her presence. Whatever he felt in that moment was between him and whatever remained of 30 years of shared history. Camilla whispered a single word: acceptance. 2 officers entered, professional, unflinching, and guided her toward the vehicle waiting outside. She could take only the clothes she was wearing. All other possessions would be inventoried. Anything not deemed sentimental would be sold toward restitution. Each step she took across that floor was a step out of the life she had spent decades building. Past corridors she had walked as queen, through doors she had passed through as the most powerful woman in the household, into a car that carried no royal insignia. William watched the Range Rover disappear behind the ancient oaks. Then he turned back to his father. Charles was still seated, staring into the gray morning, relief and devastation moving through him simultaneously, the strange emotional weather of someone who has just been set free from something that was also destroying them. William placed a hand on his father's shoulder and said quietly that he had been betrayed, but now he was protected. Charles trembled. He asked what would happen next. William assured him the immediate danger was over. The finances were being stabilized, the guilty had been removed, but he made it clear the work was only beginning. Public trust had to be rebuilt. The internal structures that had allowed this to happen had to be reformed. And the monarchy had to demonstrate, not just declare, that accountability applied to everyone. Charles listened. Then he said something that William would carry with him: that vigilance must not cost the monarchy its humanity, that the institution's value came from warmth, connection, and trust, not from rigid control, that the balance between accountability and compassion would be William's greatest challenge as a future king. Kate entered quietly and stood beside her husband. She took Charles's hand and told him he would be cared for now, surrounded by people who valued him as a person, not as a crown. Charles, exhausted, emotionally raw, managed a small and broken smile. As William and Kate walked to the car, William paused at the door and looked back at the window where his father still sat. He felt the full weight of what had just happened, the corruption cut out, the pain it had caused, and the enormous work that stretched ahead. Kate took his hand. They didn't speak. The estate disappeared behind them as they drove away, the past left in the gray morning, and the future, uncertain, fragile, and urgent, still to be written. What comes next? The monarchy has survived abdications. It has survived wars and scandal and the long, slow erosion of its relevance in a modern world. But a betrayal at this depth, at the very heart of the institution, by the person positioned closest to the king, is something different. Can trust be rebuilt? Not just publicly, but internally, among the people who work within those walls and have watched this unfold? When William eventually becomes king, what does Camilla's exile look like? Does it hold? Can the crown maintain a policy of isolation from a woman who still technically holds the title of queen consort? And what about Charles himself, a man in the final chapter of his life, now processing the knowledge that the woman he loved exploited the most vulnerable period of it? These are not questions with easy answers. They are the questions that will define the next era of the British monarchy. And the weight of answering them rests entirely on the shoulders of one man, Prince William, who turned out, when it mattered most, to be exactly the king this institution needed, even before he was one. What do you think? Can the monarchy recover from a betrayal this profound? And do you believe William made the right call, or did he go too far? Let us know in the comments section below. We read every one of them. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it, because this is the kind of story that more people need to hear. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The next video is already waiting for you on your screen. Click it, you won't regret it.